Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. If you enjoyed today's content, please click like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Please share the video to your friends and family if you think this is something they would be interested in. Okay, so for today we're going to talk about the past progressive or the past continuous tense. It's a bit similar to the present progressive tense in terms of the structure, but of course we're going to have to change it for the past and its uses. So let's begin. The past progressive tense refers to an activity that was in progress at a point in time in the past or at the time of another action. The definition itself is not very easy to understand, but I'll give you an example and then I'll break it down for you. So Mary was taking pictures when it started to rain. If we take a look at the timeline, we will see that Mary was doing something which was taking pictures. So this is the activity in progress. And then another action happened, which is also in the past. So it started to rain. So while Mary was doing her action, another action interacted with that action. To form the past progressive tense, it's similar to the present progressive. However, we have to change be in this case, and we're going to change it to its past form, which is was for I, he, she, and it, and for you, we, and they, we're going to use were. To form the negative, all we need to do is to add not after our auxiliary verb was or were. So, he was not working, or we were not working. The contraction for the negative would be wasn't, and for the plurals and you, it will be weren't. To ask questions, all we need to do again is to put our auxiliary verb at the beginning of our sentence, and it will be a yes or no question. So, was she working? Were you working? For statements, this time there is no contraction between the pronoun and be, because if we contract it, it is normally used for the present tense or the present progressive tense, like I'm, she's, there. So if you say there, usually it would refer to they are instead of they were. For the negative though, we can contract was and not, and were and not. So, for the contractions, I wasn't working, he wasn't working, she wasn't working, it wasn't working. For the plurals and you, it would be you weren't working, we weren't working, they weren't working. The simple past and the past progressive tense often make use of what we call clauses. A main clause and a time clause. So for a time clause, this would be a subject, a verb. However, it is not a complete thought or a complete sentence. There are indicators of when we begin our time clauses, and this is loosely what I call a time word. So time words like while, when, after, before, until, and as soon as are often used in both the past and the past progressive. After these time words, if we include a subject and then a verb, then this is what we call a time clause. To define these time words, we'll start with while. While means during that time. This is often used when two actions are happening at the same time. When means at that specific time or at that time, and when can be used in both the past tense and also the past progressive tense. When and while are interchangeable, not unless you mean that two things are happening or were happening at the same time. So we can use while for that, but we cannot use when for that. After and before are self-explanatory, but Until means to that time and then no more or no longer. As soon as means immediately after. So let's take a look at some time clauses. For while, that will be our time word, and then we will have our subject they, and our verb, which is slept in the past tense, or were sleeping for the past progressive. So depending on whether the action happened together or not, you can use the past tense for your time clause, or if they were happening at the same time, you can use the past progressive tense, which is were sleeping. For when will be our time word, subject is Charles, came will be the verb in the past form, so when Charles came in. After is our time word, the employees is our subject, completed is our verb in the past tense. Before we left, before is our time word, the subject is we, and then the verb is left in the past form again. Until my professor, which is the subject, returned. So the verb will be in the past form. As soon as is our time word or time words. The subject is Danielle, and then the verb in the past tense is called. And again, because we have a subject, a verb, and an object, doesn't mean that this is a sentence. This is called a clause because even if I said while they slept, it doesn't really mean anything. You won't be able to understand me, right? Because there is no main clause. So this is just a time clause because it starts with a time word or time words. It has a subject and a verb. To complete our sentence, we're going to use a time clause plus comma plus a main clause. So if we start with our time clause, we need to put a comma after that time clause to separate it from our main clause. So, as soon as Danielle called, comma, I got ready to leave. If you want to start with your main clause, this is also possible. And it doesn't require a comma anymore. So you have your main clause, no comma, and then time clause, and then period. So, I got ready to leave as soon as Danielle called. Because we know that as soon as is our time word or time words, then we know that this is the beginning of our time clause, and leave would be the last word for our main clause. Between the two structures, there is really no difference. The only difference is that we used a comma for the first structure, and then we did not use a comma for the second one. Most beginners would use the second one because this is easier and you don't have to put a comma. In cases where both the main clause and the time clause have a past tense verb, the one in the time clause will be the first action, and then the one in the main clause will be the second action. So, as soon as Danielle called, so she called first, and then I got ready to leave, so which means I started preparing to leave. So the verb in the time clause will be the first action. In the past progressive tense, the time clause will contain a past tense verb, while your main clause will have a past progressive verb. So, same structure. We'll start with a time clause. When Charles came in, comma. So came would be your past tense verb. The team was still preparing the presentation. In this case, the time clause, even if it has a past tense verb, But because our main clause has a past progressive verb, the past progressive will be action number 1, and then the time clause will be action number 2. So imagine that the team was in the process of preparing the presentation. So they started before Charles came in. So they were already doing that process, and then Charles came in. So preparing the presentation was the first action, and then Charles came in is the second action. In the second structure, the meaning is still the same as the first one. However, again, we're going to put our main clause at the start of our sentence instead of at the end. And what we're going to do is we're not going to use a comma. We're just going to continue to the time clause because we know that our time clause starts with when. Just to give you another example of the simple past with time clauses, you will see that when Charles came in, comma, they asked him to wait. So came would be action number 1, and then asked would be action number 2. So he had to come in before they can ask him to do something. So when Charles came in, so that is action number 1, and then they asked him to wait. But depending on the time word that you use, for example, if I said before Charles came in, they asked him to wait. In this case, is it still the one in the time clause? No, because they asked him to wait before he came in. So even before that happened, they already asked him to do it. So in this case, the action in the time clause is not action number 1, but it will be action number 2. While is a very special time word because it can mean that 2 actions are happening at the same time, or 2 actions happened at the same time. So for a while clause, and we can use both past progressive in the time clause and in our main clause. So while we were waiting for the meeting to begin, Haley was handing out some snacks. So these 2 actions were happening at the same time. There is no action number 1 and there is no action number 2. So to wrap up, in part 1 we talked about the simple past tense, and it refers to activities that began in the past and also ended in the past. It has no connection to now. We're also going to use the past form of be, which is was or were. We're also going to use the past tense of do, which is did, for action and non-action verbs. We're going to use was, were, and did for yes or no questions and also negatives. For the past progressive tense, it refers to an action that was in progress at a point in time in the past or at a time of another action, because we have action 1 and then we have action 2. The form will be the past form of be, which is was or were, and then we're going to put a verb in its ing form. So time clause words would be something like while, when, after, before, until, and as soon as, and others. I hope this was useful for you, and if you liked our topic today, please click like. If you have any questions, put them on the comment down below and I'll get to them as soon as I can. So thank you very much, and I'll see you on the next video.